Welcome to our spring session here of Roast Preacher. This is the time where we have preachers come and tell us the lessons that they've learned from the mistakes that they've made in preaching. Of course, Kevin Adams hasn't made many, so it's going to be okay. But we're glad you're here and glad to be able to be together as we continue conversations in preaching. Will you join me in prayer? Gracious God, thank you for this time together, for the food that we share, for the conversation that strengthens us, and for our guest Kevin as he shares with us today. Will you be honored and strengthen us and help us to learn in ways that will help us in our own lives and in our preaching so that we may continue to honor you, for we love you and thank you. In Christ's name, amen. Today as our guest we have Pastor Kevin Adams, who is the pastor of East Baptist Church in Lynn, and we're delighted to be able to have him talk with us today about the lessons that he's learned from the mistakes he's made in preaching, and I'm sure that you'll be able to benefit from what he has to say. So would you please welcome warmly Reverend Kevin Adams.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. Where do I start? You know, it's a real hard thing to start with about making mistakes or whatever. But I want to start when I first came to the States. That's where I want to begin. Because I came over here the first time in 2003. And I was lecturing on the Welsh Revival in different places, different churches. And things were going really well. Really well. And when I lecture, I tend to preach as well. It's a preachy lecture. That's my problem. And, you know, I'm not sure I'd be a very good lecturer because I keep preaching all the time. The preacher in the preacher comes through. Well, I was preaching in this big church in New Hampshire. I can't remember the name of the church. Huge church in New Hampshire. And I was doing what I usually do, giving this lecture on the Welsh Revival. Pictures behind me, big pictures behind me. You know, everything I said, all the pictures were coming up. And, you know, I'd done this for 2 years. I didn't need notes. I could just run with it. And there was one picture, a picture of a Welsh evangelist. And this Welsh evangelist, a guy called Seth Joshua, you've probably never heard of him. And he has a huge moustache in the picture. Huge moustache. And in Wales, I would always draw attention to this and say, that's what you call an evangelical moustache. That's a big, I want a moustache like that. But of course, I used the word that I'd used in Wales. And the word for moustache in Wales is tush. So as I was in front of this congregation of 200 or 300 people telling them, I want a tush like this guy. This is what you call an evangelical tush. This is just fantastic. And nobody responded. Everyone was like this. Usually people would have a little giggle or whatever. And of course, I went on, didn't understand what had happened. And then my team came to me afterwards and said, what did you say? I said, I didn't say anything. Then they explained to me that I was talking about having an evangelical backside, which is probably not a good way to lecture on the Welsh Revival. Which goes to show that sometimes you think you're saying something, and actually they're hearing you in a different way. And that time and time is the case when you do it cross-culturally. So I'm not doing this in any order or any chronological order. It's just some of the things I think I've blown it, okay? Some of the things where I've blown it. First one I'm going to talk about very quickly is don't believe in your own brilliance. I did that when I first became a Christian. I became a Christian, and I would preach in youth stuff. And, do you know, I thought I was pretty good. I really thought I was pretty good. I was so proud. Things were going well. I remember going to university, Bangor University. I know someone here has been to Bangor University. And then I went to sermon class, my first sermon class. And I really felt I was good. And it was my turn to preach. So I was going to give it to them. Oh, I was going to be brilliant. Do you know, they tore me down. They tore me to pieces. I felt it was like being in the charge of the light brigade, charging the guns in your underpants. You know, it was horrendous. And I remember everyone saying, oh, this wasn't good, that wasn't good, that wasn't good, that wasn't good. And one of the preaching professors says, no, that wasn't so good. And then the church history professor, he was the principal, and he said, well, Kevin, you make a preacher, you'll be all right, saving me from drowning in this avalanche of whatever. But I learned early on, I'm so thankful, don't always believe what you think about yourself and your own brilliance. It's a real dangerous place to go. And pride really does take over. Another thing I want to say is don't be a superhero. And I'm back on the pants again. Don't wear your underpants over your trousers. And I say that because I remember my own experience when I started preaching. I wanted to show all the research I had done when I was preaching. So my sermon was full of, and this meant this, or that meant that, and this meant this, and you go, and Hendrickson says this, and Calvin obviously brings this in. And you know, in the end, I showed all my preparation over what I was trying to say. And I've always looked at that as wearing, you need to wear underpants. They're good. But you don't need to show everyone the underpants. It really does spoil the sermon. Be yourself. Time and time again, I'm tempted to be someone else. The main time it happened to me, I don't know why, in the year 2002, I was invited to be the main speaker. I'm bragging, by the way. The main speaker at the national conference of Icelandic Pentecostals. I was in Iceland. They paid my way out to Iceland, and just outside Reykjavik, I was the main speaker for this international. So I felt pretty good, you know. Wow. But I'm not a Pentecostal, not in my own background, and I don't preach in a Pentecostal way. At least I don't think I do. And so there was this big conference, and you know, they were really going for it. You know, other speakers before, I want to tell you this. I want to go here. And, you know, that sort of black style or whatever. So I thought, that's not my usual style. And I had 2 major talks to do in this huge hall. And the first talk, I tried to be a Pentecostal. I died. There wasn't a response. It was dead. And I felt the echo in my own soul. If you're a preacher, I don't know if you've ever felt that. You're saying words, but they're falling down there. They're not getting there. And if they're getting there, they're just bouncing off. And it was awful. I thought, I'd come all this way to do these 2 talks. And the first one is an utter disaster. I just wanted to go to my room and hide. It's the honest truth. I was so embarrassed. So the next talk comes along, and I think, okay, forget it. I'm just going to be who I am. I'm just going to be who I am. So I just preached, as I usually preach. And you know, it was one of the best services I've ever done. It's odd that these 2 things come together. One of the worst and one of the best. And I'm judging myself. You know, I don't know about other people. The response was huge. And sometimes we've got to be okay with ourselves. We haven't got to pretend to be someone else. I was joking this weekend. A friend of mine, I won't name, I've got to be very careful. I went to a certain large church in a certain place. And, and I heard this preacher preach. And as he preached, I was giggling. I was laughing. I couldn't take him seriously because he preached exactly like Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones. Now, I don't know, anyone heard Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones? Does that make sense? Some of you? Right, okay. Well, you know, he's one of my great heroes. And, you know, I went to his funeral. I was researching him. And he preached like this. I'd like to draw your attention today to probably one of the great aspects of the Apostle Paul. Now then, let me tell you this. And this guy was preaching exactly like that. Well, I giggled all the way through. All the way through. Be yourself. Be yourself. leave people wanting more. Just a practical thing to say if you're preaching. Do you know, you might be interested in your sermon. You might think this is the most important thing in the world. But please, please don't take it for granted that others will be the same. When I started preaching, because of my Reformed background, I felt I had to preach 45 minutes every time. If I preached under 45, that wasn't a sermon. So, you know, and when people would ask me, oh, could you just do 30 minutes? It was like blasphemy. And you know, time and time again, going on and on and on can bore people to death. And one of the great heresies is to preach truth boringly. That's a heresy. That's a heresy. And when people go on and on and on and on, and they kill what they've already said. How many sermons have you been in when somebody's preaching starts well, then they go on, they go on. It's like the end movie in Lord of the Rings. I'm sorry to be critical of it. Okay, you know, it comes to a climax. Then there's another climax, and wait, there's another one. I'm still waiting. I've already finished. I want to go out. I think Peter Jackson made a directorial problem there. I would say the same about reading. I think Catch-22 by Heller is far too long. Take out 100 pages. It would be brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Les Mis, take out chapters of it, and more people will read it. And I would say the same about the brothers Karamazov and nearly all the Russian writers. Don't be a Tolstoy when you preach, okay? Don't be a Tolstoy when you preach. Be careful with the technology you use. I'm always making mistakes with technology. In church, when I preach, there's always either moving pictures behind me or pictures coming up or whatever. I like to do that in a multicultural situation. And it can be very, very helpful. But, you know, you've got to get it right. I remember when I first started doing it, I got a picture. And it was a picture of someone dressed up in a Halloween devil outfit. It was only meant to come up, literally, you know what Halloween, people scare themselves? Bang. Off. But in putting my notes, I didn't put blank afterwards. So this stayed up. I preached. I must have preached for 15 minutes with this devil above me, which I didn't see. And I came down, and my wife is very, very good. She doesn't criticize too much. She just waits. She's very good. If you're a preacher's wife or whatever, she doesn't criticize me on the day. She'll wait, and then I remember her saying maybe 2 days later, "Why did you have that picture of a devil behind you for that?" or whatever. Be careful. Because time and time again, and always, always, if you're doing the tech bit, make sure you check the pictures. Because people sometimes, our AV team sometimes gets the things wrong. Very easy to do. Keep fresh. It was easy for me when I started preaching, because I was preaching in different churches, preach the same sermon time and time again. Time and time again. It would be very easy for me, coming to the States in 2004. I came to live here in 2004. Hey, I've been preaching since 1974. That's 30 years worth of sermons, which I kept. 30 years. I could just come, never prepare anything again. Marvelous. Just go through all the series. But I came to realize, and I didn't repeat sermons. I hardly repeat sermons. Hardly. I'm not against it. But when you get bored in doing that, that boredom will come through. That will come through. So, to guard myself from doing that when I came to the States, I got all my sermons. I think they were in binders of about 30 binders full. And I burnt them in the garden. I burnt them. I can remember the flames. You don't need to roast me. I'm roasting myself. All right? I burnt them. And you know, it brought me freedom. Really, honestly. And it's been wonderful. These last 11 years of preaching down in Lynn, I've hardly repeated a sermon in 11 years. Because it's fresh. I want fresh stuff. My mother-in-law is wonderful. We have every Sunday, all the family get together. And my mother-in-law, she makes fresh bread. So when we come out to church, land there, fresh, warm bread. And it's all gorgeous. There's nothing worse than hard bread. It needs to come out of the very soul at that time. You can only wing it now and again. I like being up the front. I was telling one of you, I don't get nervous. That's not something that happens to me. Lots of preachers would be thrilled not to have that problem. I love it. I get energized by speaking and whatever. And because of that, I convinced myself time and time again that I can wing it. Maybe not do the preparation I should. And I remember in my last church, I was very busy doing lots of things outside the church as well, working on some research. And I was beginning not to prepare as much, not to give as much time, to really just write it down. And I remember one of the elders, one of my best friends, came to me and he said, "Do you know, Kevin?" He was a real close friend. He said, "Do you know, not as good as you were, Hard thing to say. Not as good as you were. You're winging it." He didn't say the word winging it. You need to give more time. And he was right. He was dead right. I was just putting some things together, not really studying as I should have been studying. That was a big mistake because I'm preaching to the same congregation week after week. If you preach to the same congregation week after week, you've really got to prepare. And one of the things I say, I just throw this in. I should have said this when I was doing the reading thing, and I forgot to say it. It was terrible. But in your reading, for instance, as a pastor and a preacher, I've always thought of offensive and defensive reading. Every preacher should have offensive and defensive reading. If you're a preacher, you will have to do defensive. Defensive reading is reading for Sunday. Sunday's coming. At the end of my week, I got Sundays are coming, to quote Tony Campolo. All right, Sundays are coming. And I've got to prepare. And I've got to read, maybe do some work in order to do that. That's defensive. I'm defending myself against Sunday. That's okay. You've got to do it. But the best reading is offensive reading. And offensive reading is when you read theology, good books, whatever, just for the sake of filling your soul. Just taking it on board. And what happens when you do that is it becomes part of you, and that comes out in the sermon. And that's a big difference from a sort of illustration. Don't get illustration books. Throw them away. If you've got illustration books, throw them away. Get your own illustrations. I think they're far, far better. I threw them away a long, long time ago. Don't let people guess your ending. When I started preaching, I would start the sermon and say, well, typical 3 points, always 3 points. And, it said, today we're going to look at, I'm making this up, the devil as an enemy, the devil as a seducer, the devil as In other words, I've given away everything I've said. And time and time again, I go to some churches, and you actually get all the sermon notes given to you. What? Keep people guessing. It's like reading the end of the novel first. I know people who do that. People do that. They do that. A lot of people do that. But I think it spoils them. So I over years now, I never do that. I never give away the ending. So it keeps people in suspense. Be careful in your illustrations. My problem, I get passionate about certain areas of learning. One of my hobbies is military history. I love military history. Absolutely love it. So I read on World War I, World War II. I read on Napoleonic Wars. Whatever. If there's a war, I want to read about it. I want to know what happened. And I'm really into this world, looking at documentaries. And the problem is, time and time again, my sermons are so full of war illustrations because my mind is so full of it. It's nothing wrong with a war illustration, nothing at all. I know in studying Nazi Germany, we've talked about the Bonhoeffer and Himmler and whatever. Because I was so much into that at one time, I was always quoting the same people. And you've got to be careful. Because it's not right. You've got to read widely. You've got to think about your congregation. And time again, I have failed there in my excitement about my latest craze. And I live by crazes, not by crazes alone, but I do live by crazes. Intentionally go outside your reading. Two other things, all to do with what you feel about your sermon afterwards. I did a conference in the 80s. It was a church conference. And I preached this church conference. And I felt it was terrible. I just felt it was, I was depressed. I left quickly. I didn't want anyone to talk to me about it. Off I went. And I was even more depressed because it was recorded and it was going to be sold. So I thought, I've blown it now. This was going to be part of a series. I was so embarrassed. I didn't want to see the people. I didn't want to talk to them. Years later, I see it as part of a series. So I thought, should I buy it? So I bought my own sermon. Didn't listen to it to begin with. Too scared. Then I got up the courage to listen to one of the worst sermons I've ever given. It was brilliant. Honestly, I was great. I was. But I'd walked out thinking it was a total flop. It was brilliant. And I've got copies for sale right now if you want to get one. You too can have a copy of one of the greatest sermons. I'm sorry. Sometimes we misunderstand what we say. And so many people feel down for so long. I didn't need to. I somehow misinterpreted myself. And I want to say, it's okay to take praise. It really is. It's okay. When someone says you're good, it's okay. In my tradition in Wales, it's not. It's not. In other words, you must always be, etc., etc. I've turned against that. If someone says that was good, I say, thank you very much. Great. Get on with it. Get on with it. I remember doing, I was speaking at a conference in Britain. We called it Spring Harvest. And Spring Harvest was the big evangelical conference in Britain. And myself and another Kevin, we were doing some seminars. And they really went well. They were great. And because it was all in one camp, okay? It was all in one camp. You were constantly bumping into the people you were preaching to. And we finished these 4 lectures, doing it every day. And so we're walking around the camp, going back. And people were coming up to us saying, oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was great. You really made our holiday. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we come into our room, and we said, oh, wasn't that good? Should we go for another walk round? It's true. It was great. And maybe there's a lot of pride in that one, okay? But it's okay to when someone says thanks. Last thing is I'm going to talk about my brother, my favorite story about my brother. Both my brothers are preachers. And Mike used to head up a missions agency in Wales called Horizons International. And time and time again, there would be a speaker coming over and whatever. And Mike is a rugby player, big guy, monster of a guy, you know. And never gone to college, not a reader, brilliant preacher. Very, very good, down to earth, very funny. And so some speaker comes to speak at their conference, And Mike thinks he's great. So he goes up to the guy and he says, I just want to thank you. That was great. And the guy said, no, no, it's not me. That was the Lord. And my brother said, you weren't that good. I think that brings out the balance. I love that story. I leave for questions. I'm told to leave for questions. So there we are. Anything you like.
Thanks. Kevin, you burned all your sermons, and you talked about mistakes that you've made in delivery and so forth and so on in preparation. Are you free to talk about ways you've changed theologically? When you start out as a new pastor in a church, I'm sure we can't assume that we have it all right.
I've had to change so much.
Right. So, 30 years later in your ministry, what did you preach that you wish you hadn't preached?
Oh, man. Wow. I think sometimes I became a Christian through the Plymouth Brethren, which was a strong fundamentalist, background. I think the world of them, they were great to me. I think I mentioned one thing that is very clear to me. I thought a good sermon was when I would challenge everyone and everyone felt guilty afterwards. I did, and that's the Welsh way, typical Welsh, and people would be really glad they felt guilty. They're very happy. The Welsh talk in a minor key, okay? And, so people would come out of a sermon and say, oh, that was really good. That was really good, because you'd slammed into them, and it's whipping them, And so there was that element, I think I was getting at people. And over the years, that has changed, as I've realized that people, when they go to church, they got enough problems very often, and they need encouragement. There are times where of course, you get the biblical balance, but that is what I have really changed on. And there are small things as well, obviously, in theology, coming from Plymouth Brethren to now being independent Baptist is an interesting journey. Okay, so I think lots of things. But that's the one I would emphasize. It's a great question. Great question.
So, Kevin,
Yeah.
how have you chosen to go outside of your normal reading areas? What kind of things do you read that are outside of your area?
I read my reading. I could just go on and on with this, but really, for me, first thing I want to say is it's different for everybody. Okay, I'm not saying this is just anecdote. It's just mine. For me, I read classical literature. So the classics of literature, my main readings, classics of literature. When I'm in classics, I mean anything from the Western canon of literature right up to the present day. So I read out, I read non-theologically. That's my non-theological reading, as well as reading military history. They're the two. So any good novel or good writing, I just love. I love the American writers. Steinbeck is my favorite. And my favorite novel is Grapes of Wrath. I think it's utterly magnificent. I disagree with many things he says in that. And it's an attack, really, on Christianity in many ways. But at the same time, brilliantly written, trying to understand the secular mind. So lots. I could just go on and on. But just say the word.
A regular reading schedule?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
It's on your calendar?
Oh, absolutely. When I came to the church, because I was older coming to the church, I was 47, you're a bit older, you can get over, when you discuss. So I said, I want one day when I read, just read. So every Friday is my reading day. I stay home and read. Whatever I want. That's part of it. Now, sometimes, if there's a funeral, if there's something on, you can't do that. I don't hold that. But I try and read regular. I read with people. I have readers. I have 2 or 3 readers I read with. You've met.
Tell them about that.
I have 1 or 2 people I read with. I have an atheist friend I read with. once a month. Every month we meet together and read a book and talk about that book. I have another 2 Christians I read with. They read together now. We choose a book and we discuss that. I'm part of the Pastor's Roundtable as well. Just come from that today, where we read a book. We're doing something on Islam today. So that really is great, because you're discussing the book. And that book becomes part of you. And they're bringing different things in. I recommend it, when I was speaking in your class. I was talking how important that is, how life-changing it can be in bringing stuff in from something read to something being part of you. So I'm a total addict on pushing that and reading. Yeah. I think you've got to read widely. And there are exceptions, like my brother, who doesn't read widely at all, and he's brilliant. There's always exceptions. so I'm saying that, and I'm immediately putting an appendix on it and a footnote. Okay?
Okay, Pastor Kevin, have you experienced a situation where after preaching, someone accuses you of making the sermon about them? And how did you respond to that?
I don't think I have, believe it or not. I can't think of one, but I would say something like this if someone comes. My quick answer, which is, I would say, well, I would say, if the suit fits, it's not my fault, but I don't do that. I purposely don't do that. But I don't not preach about certain issues, because I know certain people in the church are like that. So I have got people in mind, obviously. You've got to have people in mind. And as you're preaching, I'm not preaching to anyone. It's ridiculous. Of course, you're preaching to the situation. So that could come. And but it would be wrong to, make everyone know who that person would be, I would say. But I've never had it. I've had lots of people say, oh, that sermon was really for me. But that's a different thing. I know the question you've got, and that would be a different thing. But I try and let the Holy Spirit apply to different people's hearts. Yeah, it hasn't happened, I'm glad.
I'm always curious about the role of your spouse in your development as a preacher and a pastor.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy, what do you say? She's great, fair play. She really is. Now, because I was single until I was 47, so I don't like being criticized. I got to be honest, I don't like it. So if Gwen says something, do you think maybe you shouldn't have used that illustration? I'm growling inside. But she is very, very good, and she understands. One of the main things, believe it or not, she likes my preaching, so that's an advantage. And even more, my mother-in-law likes my preaching, which is fantastic. All right. One thing that's really helped me having a wife is that I do use my wife in illustrations. I do. Some pastors say, don't do that. I say, do it, but please be careful. I have made, maybe there was one, I blew it. I did blow it. And I said something. I'm just thinking, just the top of my mind, because I just think on the top, and something comes out, you can't take it back. So I was saying, I said, do you know, me and my wife, it's fantastic. I said, do you know, I come home, Gwen is there, open the door, food is ready, I get a kiss on the cheek, and then I woke up. And I said it like that. Because I thought it was funny. I really thought that was funny. What I was trying to do, I was just trying to show that every husband and wife, there's no perfection. I was just trying to do it in a funny way. Anyway, later on that day, are you quiet? What's wrong, Bach? What you said. What did I say? What did I say? So she said, and I said, yeah, you got it. It's the only time I've got it wrong. But what it does, the congregation expect me to speak about my wife. They like it, because, I don't know, it makes me, it's one of the, do you know the best thing about her? she makes me look good. And people think in their mind, he can't be as bad as he looks. As he sounds. If Gwen married him, he's all right. So that's the best. She makes me look great. Yeah.
Yeah, Pastor Kevin, I see you in the library here every Wednesday or so.
Yes, I'm here every Tuesday.
Tuesday.
I prepare my sermons here.
How long does it take you to prepare your sermon, having the number of years you've been in the ministry?
There is a cliche I could use here, okay, which is true, but it's a cliche. Oh, takes me a lifetime, which means, I'm 58, so it took me 58 years, in that sense. And there's truth in that. But to answer your question, generally I do some research on the week previously. Then Monday I come into my office in Lynn. Monday I dedicate to the detailed research, all the notes, piles of notes, commentaries, whatever. That's my Monday. And then Tuesday I come up here, I write up all the text. So generally I've got the text of my sermon fully done by Tuesday. And then on Wednesday morning, I hand it in to my AV team. And then Wednesday morning, I research the images and put them on a file and put them where they come in the sermon and hand into the AV team. And I get my copy back by 6 o'clock. So Wednesday, 6 o'clock, sermon done, everything done, which gives me a free mind for the rest of the week. That's how I do it. I think it's great. It works for me because Saturday is my day off. No, don't think about sermon, nothing. That's how I do it. I'm not saying it's the right way, but.
So you said that you keep people guessing in your sermons, so you said you don't give away your ending to the sermons. You said you used to do point 1, point 2, point 3.
Yeah.
So how do you keep the clarity then if you don't do that? How do you review and preview and keep people tracking?
You can't do it exactly the same every time. But I think sometimes you need to build up, and then you're coming somewhere, and then you ask a question. I think asking questions is great. You say, so how can, last week I said, how can a 21st century person believe that a carpenter was actually God's son? How do you come to believe that? I want to put you in, how do we convince, how do you believe? So then I work that theme all the way through. So people are listening. They want to because we've asked a question. You're not just telling them, I'm going to go through these things. So something like that. Now, in discovery, you model what you've discovered in your presentation. That's how I do it anyway. My research, you see my, not underpants research, okay? But research coming out, the questions I had to ask, and then coming to various conclusions. That's how I do it. Last question. I know it's 1 o'clock.
All right. When you talked earlier about your transition from the Plymouth Brethren to the Baptist.
Yeah.
And being here, I think about this a lot with the multi-denominational setting and my brothers and sisters who believe things differently and very passionately. And I just wonder, as I think about the future, coming to those disputed doctrines, those verses that we're not agreeing on, and how, especially if you change your mind, being in your situation, how have you dealt with that, and what goes through your mind in that?
My answer is simple. In the church I'm at now, on secondary issues, I don't mind what people believe. I say that publicly. I don't mind. If you're a premillennialist in our church, it's okay. If you're a post-millennialist, it's okay. If you're a millennial, it's okay on that. For instance, you might have different views of the Spirit. You might have different views of lots of things. It's okay. Keep them in tension. There are differences on the major issues. That would be different. But I try and allow people to think it through themselves, and try and allow. Because if you just tell people you must believe something like this, they still won't believe it. They still won't believe it. They're not going to believe it. If you said, you must believe this, well, they say, okay. But they won't believe it. That's the only way you can do it. But if you say, it's okay to work this out, that's great. And to be relaxed in that, I think, is the main thing. Doesn't always work. It means that certain people won't come to your church who are very, very strong. So when we get mentored students from the seminary here, one of the questions I ask them, very simply, I don't mind if you're a Calvinist, if you're more Arminian, I don't mind that. But if you're going to just push that on absolutely everyone who's different, you're in the wrong church. So it means, you can't cater for everybody. But I think you can cater for a while, especially I need to in Lynn. Very much so. Very much so. Pardon me.
Please, would you give your thanks to Pastor Adams?